He picked up her sword. It started glowing, and her warriors fled in terror. The smoke from the plasma grenades hung heavy in the air, tasting of burnt metal and scorched earth. Atticus crouched behind the remains of a fallen transport, his fingers slick with grease and coolant. Across the clearing, Liara was struggling to stand, her indigo skin shimmering under the harsh violet sky. The elite warriors of the hegemony closed in, their energy lances humming with lethal intent. Liara reached for the hilt of the soul shredder, but her fingers slipped, her strength failing as a jagged wound in her side bled a vibrant, glowing violet. The sword lay in the dirt, a dormant piece of black metal that supposedly carried the wrath of 1,000 stars. Atticus did not hesitate. He sprinted across the open ground, bullets from his kinetic rifle kicking up dust around his boots. He reached the blade and closed his hand around the grip. The metal was ice-cold for a heartbeat, then it hummed. A shock of white-hot energy surged up his arm, making his teeth ache and his vision blur. Instead of the sword rejecting him as a commoner or an alien, it roared to life. A pillar of brilliant white light erupted from the hilt, screaming into the sky with a frequency that made the ground tremble. The warriors of the hegemony stopped dead. Their lances flickered and died, the biotech in their armor seizing up. "Impossible," Liara whispered, her eyes wide as she stared at the human who held the unholdable. Atticus swung the blade in a wide arc. The white light carved through the air, leaving a trail of ionized gas. The warriors turned and fled, their disciplined formation breaking into a panicked rout as they shrieked about the return of the Void Walker. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the crackle of burning debris. Atticus turned to Liara, the sword still glowing with a soft, pulsing rhythm that matched his own heartbeat. He offered her his free hand, his knuckles white from the grip. "We need to go," he said, his voice raspy from the smoke. Liara stared at his hand, then at his face. She was taller than most humans, her frame a mix of lithe grace and hardened muscle. Her eyes, deep pools of midnight flecked with gold, searched his own for a long moment. She took his hand, her skin burning hot against his calloused palm. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through him that had nothing to do with the sword. He pulled her up, her weight leaning heavily into his chest. The scent of her was like rain on hot stone and crushed jasmine. "Why does it speak to you?" she asked, her breath hitching as he wrapped an arm around her waist to steady her. "I'm just an engineer, Liara," he replied, scanning the tree line for more hostiles. "It probably just likes my battery pack." "No," she murmured, her hand moving to rest against the center of his chest over the thudding rhythm of his heart. "It responds to the fire inside. My people have grown cold, Atticus. We are too controlled." He looked down at her, the intensity of her gaze pinning him in place. The suggestive curve of her lips and the way her body molded against his triggered a primal response he couldn't hide. Her fingers curled into his tactical vest, pulling him a fraction closer. "The warriors think you are a god," she whispered. "I'm just a man who doesn't like seeing his partner get killed," he said. They moved into the dense foliage of the shadowwoods, the bioluminescent plants flaring into life as they passed. Atticus kept the sword held low, the light dimmed but still present. Every few minutes, Liara stumbled, the wound in her side taking its toll. They found a shallow cave hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines. Atticus guided her inside, setting the glowing blade against the stone wall. "Let me see the wound," he said, reaching for his medical kit. Liara sat back against the cool rock, her chest heaving. She began to unfasten the plates of her ceremonial armor. As the metal slid away, it revealed the tight, form-fitting bodysuit underneath, which was torn and soaked in violet blood. Atticus knelt between her legs, his hands steady as he worked the fabric away from the injury. The sight of her bare skin, smooth and iridescent in the sword's light, made his throat dry. "You are starring," she noted, a faint smirk touching her lips despite the pain. "It is a very impressive wound," he countered, though his eyes lingered on the curve of her hip. He applied a human dermal sealant, the chemical reaction causing her to hiss and arch her back. Her hands flew to his shoulders, her claws digging slightly into his skin. "It stings," she gasped, her eyes locking onto his. "I know, just breathe through it," he said, his voice dropping an octave. The air in the cave grew thick with a sudden, heavy tension. The sealant bubbled and set, closing the gash, but neither of them moved. Atticus could feel the heat radiating from her, a magnetic pull that drew him toward her. He reached up, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. Liara leaned into the touch, her eyes fluttering shut. "You are a strange creature, Atticus," she whispered, her voice a low hum. "You handle a weapon of the gods as if it were a wrench, and you touch me as if I were made of glass." "You aren't glass," he said, his hand sliding back to the nape of her neck. "You're the most dangerous woman in this sector. And yet," she said, opening her eyes to reveal pupils blown wide with desire, "I want you to hold me as if I were nothing more than yours." She pulled him forward, her lips meeting his in a collision of desperate hunger. The kiss was not gentle. It was a clash of cultures and biology, a fierce claim that left Atticus breathless. Her tongue danced with his, tasting of the exotic spices her people favored. He moved his hands down her back, pressing her body into his until there was no space left between them. The sword on the floor pulsed brighter, the white light turning a soft, warm pink. "The sword," Liara panted against his neck, her teeth grazing his skin. "It knows. It is a conduit for the nervous system. Your human biology is chaotic. It thrives on the surges of your passion." The revelation hit him like a physical blow. The weapon wasn't just a tool, it was an amplifier of human emotion. "Then let's give it something to talk about," he growled, lifting her and settling her more firmly against him. Her legs wrapped around his waist, the friction of her bodysuit against his trousers sending sparks through his nerves. He was a man of logic and gears, but in this moment he was nothing but instinct and heat. The night deepened, the cave filled with the sounds of their shared breath and the soft hum of the ancient blade. Every touch was a discovery, a map of skin and soul. Atticus found the sensitive spots behind her pointed ears, the way she arched when he kissed the hollow of her throat. She was vocal, her moans vibrating in her chest like a purring predator. The intensity of their connection felt like a galaxy-scale event, a convergence of two worlds that should never have met. "I have never felt this," Liara confessed, her fingers tangled in his hair as they lay on the hard ground. "The hegemony teaches us to suppress, to be pure in our logic." "Logic doesn't win wars, Liara," Atticus said, his hand tracing the glowing tattoos on her forearm. "Passion does. The will to survive, the will to protect what's ours." "Is that what I am?" she asked, her voice soft. "Yours. You've been mine since the day you hired me to fix your ship," he said, leaning down to kiss her again. The twist in their situation was becoming clear. The sword was responding to his adrenaline and his love for her. If word got out that a human could weaponize the soul shredder through raw emotion, the political structure of the galaxy would crumble. The hegemony relied on the belief that only their bloodline could lead. Atticus was a living refutation of their divine right. "The High Priestess will come for us," Liara warned, her expression turning serious. "She will see this as a desecration." "Let her come," Atticus said, his eyes turning to the blade. "I've got a lot of passion left." By dawn, the forest was crawling with search parties. Atticus watched from the cave entrance, his tactical HUD highlighting the heat signatures of the armored scouts. Liara stood behind him, her armor refitted, though she moved with a new, fluid confidence. "They are using wide-spectrum scanners," she noted, her hand resting on the hilt of the sword now strapped to her back. "They will find us within the hour." "We aren't going to hide," Atticus said, checking the charge on his kinetic rifle. "We're going to the extraction point." "There are hundreds of them, Atticus," she said, her concern evident. "Then we'll have to be faster," he replied, a smirk playing on his face. He turned to her, his hand reaching out to squeeze her shoulder. "Can you handle the sword while I cover you?" "The sword will not answer me now," she said, her gaze dropping. "It has tasted you. It wants the human." Atticus took the blade from her, the metal immediately warming to his touch. "Then I'll lead the way." They broke from the cave, sprinting through the undergrowth. A scout team intercepted them within minutes. The aliens raised their lances, but Atticus didn't fire his rifle. He ignited the soul shredder. The white light was blinding in the dim morning light, a roar of energy that knocked the scouts off their feet before he even swung. He didn't kill them, he simply overloaded their systems. He moved with a speed that defied their expectations, his human reflexes honed by years of high-gravity engineering work. Liara followed in his wake, her own combat skills finishing what he started. They were a whirlwind of indigo and steel, a terrifying sight for the hegemony soldiers. The extraction point was a landing pad perched on the edge of a sheer cliff. A massive dropship sat there, its engines idling, surrounded by a battalion of the High Priestess's personal guard. In the center stood Gideon, a high-ranking official of the hegemony who had always looked down on humans. "Release the blade, human," Gideon shouted, his voice amplified by his helmet. "It is not for your primitive hands to touch." Atticus stepped into the clearing, the sword held high. The light from the blade was so intense now that it seemed to be bleeding into the air around him. "This blade doesn't belong to a bloodline," Atticus shouted back, his voice steady. "It belongs to whoever has the heart to wield it." Liara stepped up beside him, her hand resting on his lower back. The physical contact acted as a catalyst. The sword's output doubled, the white light turning into a roaring flame of pure energy. Gideon's warriors took a step back, their hands trembling. They had been raised on stories of the sword's power, but they had never seen it like this. It wasn't a cold, calculated weapon anymore. It was a manifestation of human defiance. "Seize them," Gideon commanded, but no one moved. The status dynamics had shifted. The soldiers looked at Atticus, then at each other. To them, the sword was the ultimate authority. If the sword chose the human, who were they to argue? The prophecy said the blade would glow when the true heir returned. One of the younger soldiers whispered, dropping his lance. "He is no heir," Gideon screamed, drawing his own sidearm. Atticus didn't give him the chance to fire. He lunged forward, the ground cracking under his boots. He didn't use the blade to strike. He used the sheer pressure of the energy field it generated. A wave of white force slammed into Gideon, throwing him back against the hull of the dropship. The official slumped to the ground, unconscious. Atticus stood in the center of the pad, the sword humming a low, satisfied note. The remaining warriors knelt, one by one, their heads bowed. Liara looked at Atticus, her eyes shining with pride and something deeper. "You've done it," she whispered, her voice carrying across the silent clearing. "You've broken 1,000 years of tradition in a single morning." "I just wanted a ride home," Atticus said, though he didn't lower the sword. He could feel the power of the blade flowing through him, a connection to the very fabric of the galaxy. It was an engineering marvel, a device that translated neural pathways into physical force. And humans, with their high-stress lives and intense emotional ranges, were the perfect operators. "This is only the beginning, isn't it?" he asked, looking at the dropship. "The rest of the galaxy is going to want to know how a human did this." "Then we will show them together," Liara said, stepping forward to take his hand. The touch was grounding, a reminder of the woman he had fought for. They walked toward the ship, the warriors parting like a sea of indigo. Inside the ship, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken questions. Vaynay, the pilot, stared at Atticus as if he were a ghost. "The sensors are off the charts," Vaynay said, her hands hovering over the controls. "That blade is putting out enough energy to power a small colony." "Just get us to the human sector," Atticus said, sitting in the co-pilot's chair. Liara sat beside him, her hand never leaving his. As the ship broke the atmosphere, the violet moon of Valyx began to shrink below them. Atticus looked at the sword, now resting in his lap. It had dimmed to a steady, comforting glow. "What happens now?" he asked, turning to Liara. "Now," she said, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. "We tell the Human Alliance what we've discovered." "They won't believe it," Atticus said, a tired smile on his face. "They've always seen us as the builders, the technicians, not the warriors of legend." "They will believe it when they see you," she said, leaning over to press a lingering kiss to his cheek. "You have redefined what it means to be a hero in this galaxy." The romantic tension between them hadn't faded. If anything, it had solidified into something unbreakable. They had survived an impossible night, and in doing so, they had forged a bond that would change the course of history. Atticus closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the steady thrum of the ship and the warmth of the woman beside him. He was just an engineer, but he had found something worth building a future on. Journey back to the human colonies took several days, and they spent most of it in the small captain's quarters. The danger had passed, but the intensity of their physical connection only grew. Without the threat of death hanging over them, they explored each other with a slower, more deliberate passion. Atticus learned the stories behind her tattoos, each one a mark of a battle won or a loss endured. Liara learned the history of the scars on his hands, the result of years spent coaxing machines back to life. "I used to think my life was complete," Liara said one evening, her head resting on his chest as they lay tangled in the sheets. "I had my rank, my duty, my blade. And now," Atticus asked, his fingers tracing the curve of her spine. "Now I have a human who breaks all the rules," she said, looking up at him with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "It is much more interesting." He laughed, the sound low and warm in the quiet room. We're going to have a lot of work to do, Liara. The hegemony won't just let us go. Let them try, she said, her voice turning fierce. They saw what you did with the soul shredder. They are afraid, Atticus. For the first time in an eon, they are afraid of someone else's potential. It's not just the sword, he said, pulling her closer. It's us. They're afraid of what happens when our worlds actually start working together. Then we give them a reason to be terrified, she whispered, her lips finding his again. As the ship finally entered human-controlled space, the communications console lit up with a dozen high-priority pings. The news had traveled faster than they had. A human wielding the soul shredder was a story that couldn't be contained. Atticus stood on the bridge, the blade once again strapped to his back. He looked at the view screen, where a massive human dreadnought, the USS Bastilla, was waiting for them. "Are you ready for this?" he asked Liara. She stood beside him, her posture regal, her indigo skin radiant in the light of the human sun. "I am with you," she said, her voice echoing with a strength that made his heart swell. "That is all I need." The docking sequence began, the mechanical thuds of the clamps resonating through the hull. Atticus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the sword and the responsibility it carried. He wasn't just representing himself anymore. He was representing the ingenuity and the heart of his entire species. The doors hissed open, and a contingent of human soldiers stood at attention, their eyes wide as they saw the glowing alien blade. Atticus stepped out, Liara at his side, her hand firmly in his. The galaxy was about to change, and they were the ones holding the key. "Welcome back, Atticus," one of the soldiers said, his voice full of awe. "We've heard things." "You haven't seen anything yet," Atticus said, a confident smile crossing his face. He looked at Liara, and for the first time in his life, he knew exactly where he belonged. The HFY era had truly begun, fueled by human passion and alien mystery.